Good morning, Grace Church. We are in the house of the Lord today. We can rejoice and be glad in that. My name is Arlene Jackson. I am your pastor here at Grace Church. It's good to be in worship with all of you today, sharing week 2 of this message series called Rebuild. We all agreed last Sunday, if you were here, that rebuild is a good theme to camp out on these days, considering the damage that Hurricane Ian did to our community, but to go a step further, considering the places in each of our own selves that might need some rebuilding in these days. Now, I shared with you last Sunday that Chris and I are on this seemingly endless tangle of renovating our home that was destroyed by Hurricane Ian, right? After we emerged from being literally 3 feet underwater, the rebuilding began. Friends from right here, I can point to you guys, came and helped us muck out the mess. What a mess. And then a mission team from another state came, and they helped us tear out all our drywall and the kitchen and the bathroom. Here's a picture of our house down to the studs. It's at least one picture. Oh, yeah, it's a mess. Tearing it apart was the easy part, okay? Oh, yeah, it's the rebuilding. The rebuilding is another issue, right? So Chris and I aren't builders. No. We know nothing about it. We know nothing about this stuff. So we had to trust a contractor, and our contractor, Jeremy, is constantly assuring us that things are going just as they should. We're usually convinced that they're not. But Jeremy patiently tells us that they are. I fall into the habit of trying to tell Jeremy how to do his job. Mind you, I know nothing about air conditioning or electrical or plumbing or cabinetry or tile or drywall. Absolutely nothing. Now, Jeremy's job is mostly to tell me to chill, to leave the restoration and the rebuilding and renovation to him. That to him, this stuff is his life. It's easy for him. He knows what he's doing. Every day, I have to decide to give Jeremy the reins of this project for the sake of my house, my family, and my faith, too. He knows what he's doing. I need to trust him. This is like my relationship with God, really, if I can share this with you. I need to trust him. I need to trust him. See, God is in the business of restoring and rebuilding and renovating and recreating. I'm not in that business. He is. God is the God of God is the master rebuilder because he's the God of restoration. Now, to restore means to bring back to the original condition. And that's what God can do in a city, but that's also what God can do in a person. See, God restores confidence, he restores purity, restores purpose, God restores trust, he restores health, God restores faith, and God is the restorer of relationships of all kinds. God restores wherever a heart is broken. God is there to restore and rebuild from the ashes. God makes all things new. So we learned last Sunday, that God, not human ability, is the foundation of a rebuilt life. In fact, let's say that again, together. Go. God, not human ability, is the foundation of a rebuilt life. Great. So, what needs restoration in your personal realm today? What is it that is like sucking your joy and you wish it was different? What is it in the brokenness of our community that breaks your heart? Can you name these things? Well, if you can, then keep them in your mind as we go on today. No matter how or where you might need restoration today, God is who you're going to want to turn to, okay? No matter how our community, our church, our neighborhoods, or our own hearts and souls need restoration, God is the one who can do it. Believe it. So, with this foundation in place, this morning we're going to continue in part 2 of our Sunday series that we started last week about a guy named Nehemiah, who we find in the Old Testament of our Bible. Now, Nehemiah took on a monster restoration project, a rebuild of an entire city. But not just any city, it was the city of Jerusalem itself, the center of worship for the Jewish people. And here's why the city needed rebuilding. Let me give you a little background on it. When King David, who was the most faithful king that Israel ever had, died, some leaders came up that were not faithful and were not godly. And as politics usually go, right, this caused the eventual split of God's 12 tribes of people. 10 tribes aligned with the south under the name of Judah, and 2 tribes held together in the north, but not for long. But not for long. The north was eventually overrun by the Assyrians. And then, not long after, the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar conquered and destroyed the south, overran it all, including the city of Jerusalem, leaving it in ruins. But wait, there's more. Because just a few decades later, the Babylonians were overrun by the Persians. There was a lot of overrunning going on, okay, in those days. And in these days, too, it seems, but that's for another story, right? We're gonna save that. So with Jerusalem in ruins and countless Jewish people exiled all over the place, God never, not once, did he ever forget about his people. While the glorious temple and the majestic city lay in ruins and rubble, God's plan and purpose for his people was not destroyed. And why? Because, like you know, God is a restorer. He's a rebuilder. He's a recreator. God makes all things new. So there's the backstory, okay? There's the backdrop. Meanwhile, a Jewish guy named Nehemiah had been born in Persian captivity and was going about living his life in a town called Susa, which was 850 miles from Jerusalem. Now imagine how far that is in ancient time, right? Imagine that. It's far for us. We have planes, trains, and automobiles, and it's far for us. They didn't. It was far away. Now, Nehemiah had risen to the top of job that he could have in the Persian Empire. His responsibility was to be the cupbearer to the king, which means before King Artaxerxes ever took a sip of anything, Nehemiah had to taste it first to make sure it wasn't poisonous. Great job, right? So Nehemiah was important, but not so important that he couldn't die of being poisoned. Let's keep this in mind, okay? In fact, side note, little squirrel I'm going to chase here. Sort of reminds me what happened on 9/11 when after the Twin Towers fell in New York, all the airplanes in American airspace were diverted to land in a little remote town in Newfoundland called Gander that had a nearly abandoned airport. And why did they all get diverted there? Because if there was a bomb on any of the airplanes entering airspace, Gander would be the one blown up, not some big city like New York or Chicago. Great stuff, huh? Nehemiah was that guy. Okay, Nehemiah was that guy. And he's going about his business, right? He's going about his business when he hears some news about Jerusalem, the city of his ancestors that he has never lived in. And he hears that some of the exiled people, his people, were being allowed to return to Jerusalem, but the city itself was in ruins. The walls were broken down. The city was vulnerable to any danger that came its way. And Nehemiah, he takes it personally. He takes it personally. It cuts him to the core. He has to do something. What could he do? What could he do? But how can he do anything? See, Nehemiah knew himself. Nehemiah knows this rebuilding is not the job of a cupbearer like he is. Not on his own brain power, no. What does he know about construction? Nothing. So what's about to come is nothing short of miraculous. Nehemiah is about to go from being a cupbearer for a pagan Persian king to a construction manager for the King of Kings and a Lord of heaven and earth. Nehemiah is going to discover and hopefully teach us what's God's part in God's rebuilding plans and what's ours. We'll see how Nehemiah looks to God to see what God's will is. And it's through prayer that he finds it out. This is our takeaway for today. It's on the screen. Say it with me. Let's say it together. Go. To begin rebuilding, I must stay prayerfully alert. Rebuilding means I better pray and then stay alert. Stay alert to God's response. You know, one of the most often questions I get asked as a pastor, and one of the most questions I have in my life as well, is this: what is God's will for my life? People always want to know that, and I want to know that too. Deep down in our soul, each of us longs to know our purpose, our reason for even being here. And prayer is the thing that gets us there. Just like we read in 1 Thessalonians 5:16 through 18. In fact, it's on the screen. Say it with me. Go. Rejoice always. Never stop praying. Give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. See, with rejoicing and praying and thanksgiving, next we turn our ear and our heart and our mind to God's response. We stay alert because God speaks. So today, first off, if you are asking God to begin a rebuilding effort in your own life, or if you're asking him to enroll you in a building project for the fame of Jesus' name, the starting point is the same. Praying for wisdom and direction from the one who is the master rebuilder, God. And then don't hang up the phone, okay? Stay alert. So we're going to go to chapter 2 of the book of Nehemiah. As we walk through today's verses, hopefully we're going to find 4 ways that Nehemiah prayed and stayed alert in his deep discontent over the state of Jerusalem's walls, and hopefully this can help us as well. So listen to how the story goes. It goes like this. I'm going to read you the whole thing. Early in the following spring, in the month of Nisan, during the 20th year of King Artaxerxes' reign, I was serving the king his wine. I had never before appeared sad in his presence, so the king asked me, "Why are you looking sad? You don't look sick to me. You must be deeply troubled." Then I was terrified, but I replied, "Long live the king. How can I not be sad? For the city where my ancestors are buried is in ruins, and the gates have been destroyed by fire." And the king asked, "Well, how can I help you?" With a prayer to the God of heaven, I replied, "If it please the king, and if you're pleased with me, your servant, send me to Judah to rebuild the city where my ancestors are buried." The king, with the queen sitting beside him, asked, "Well, how long you'll be gone? When will you return?" After I told him how long I'd be gone, the king agreed to my request. I also said to the king, "If it pleases the king, let me have letters addressed to the governors of the province west of the Euphrates River, instructing them to let me travel safely through their territories on my way to Judah. And please, give me a letter addressed to Asaph, the manager of the king's forest, instructing him to give me timber. I'll need it to make beams for the gates of the temple fortress, for the city walls, and for a house for myself." And the king granted these requests because the gracious hand of God was on me. When I came to the governors of the province west of the Euphrates River, I delivered the king's letters to him. The king, I should add, had sent along army officers and horsemen to protect me. So the first way Nehemiah stayed prayerfully alert was by waiting. The first verse tells us that the king addressed Nehemiah's sadness in the month of Nisan. We know that the month of Nisan is April. Now, from a previous verse that we didn't read today, we know that Nehemiah found out about the state of Jerusalem in the month of Chislev. The month of Chislev was December. This meant that Nehemiah had this burning in his bones, this concern in his soul, this emerging dream in his mind for 4 long months where nothing happens. You know, I can feel his pain. You know why? Because right now it's been about 4 long months that our house is still unlivable. When, God, when? When? You know, the first chapter of the book of Nehemiah ends with a long prayer. For 4 months, Nehemiah prayed something like what is recorded in verse 11 of chapter 1 when he prayed, "O Lord, hear my prayer. Please grant me success today by making the king favorable to me. Put it into his heart to be kind to me." 4 months, nothing happens. Crickets. Right? Don't you hate being put on hold when you call a business? How much do you hate that? I hate it. But here, God puts Nehemiah on hold. How do you deal with it when God puts you on hold and your prayers seem unanswered? Probably about as well as I do. Probably not well. But let me assure both you and me that the Lord is preparing us as we wait. He's growing us through our patience. So today, if your prayers for restoration, whatever you need, are on hold, Jesus says in the Gospel of Matthew, keep on praying, keep seeking, keep knocking. Eventually you'll find, probably when you least expect it, the door will be open to you. Stay alert. See, we have a part in our rebuilt life, and it's this. Say it with me. It's on the screen. Go. To begin rebuilding, I must stay prayerfully alert in my waiting. So what happens next? One day, Nehemiah is at this banquet, and that's when the king notices that something's up with Nehemiah. Nehemiah is terrified, and rightly so. In the Persian castle, if anyone, it's kind of like the Disney castle, right? If anyone's unhappy in the presence of the king, he could have them killed because the king didn't like the negative vibes, you know? He's very Disney. But even though Nehemiah had been sad for months, it seems that for some reason, on this day, the king notices. Maybe Nehemiah just couldn't pretend anymore. Maybe it just had to all come out. I don't know. But he takes the huge risk of being honest. After respecting the king, smart guy, Nehemiah, right? Nehemiah gets real. He pushes past the fear. He goes for it. God has given him this window of opportunity. He's alert to it. He shares the burden of his heart for his people to the king of the country who caused it to begin with and who could kill him for saying it. You know, sometimes when it comes to the ways we need our lives rebuilt, we need to be prayerfully alert enough to step through our own fears. You know, I tell you all the time that I'm in 12-step recovery from drugs and alcohol for a lot of years, and to work the program of recovery, to work the 12 steps of recovery, when I first came here, it was very frightening. To live a different way was very frightening. But our third step of the program assured me that I could make a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God, and that it would be okay. I stepped through the fear, and God didn't let me down. And I'm telling you today that he will not let you down either. And then crazy things started happening for Nehemiah. Nehemiah prayed through his fears, and for whatever reason, the king said, all right. He said, okay. You know, we can learn from Nehemiah. When you need rebuilding, wherever you need it in your life, stay prayerfully alert while you wait, while you might be scared. Remember that each of us have a part in our rebuilt life, and it's this. Say it with me. Go. To begin rebuilding, I must stay prayerfully alert through my fears. Now here's where it gets fun. In the story of Nehemiah. Now to now you see him lamenting, you see him praying, waiting, right, being afraid. But what happens next is when God finally opens the door for him to speak to the king, Nehemiah's ready. Nehemiah is ready. Nehemiah has been in constant contact with God. See, God has opened the door and Nehemiah is prepared. He's ready to run through it. These 4 months of waiting must have been filled with not only prayer, but prayerful planning. Remember, Nehemiah is no city builder. He's a cupbearer, but he has done his homework. He has made a list. He has checked it twice. He has counted the cost, and he has thought through contingencies. And here's what we can know. To walk by faith is not to expect God to do all the work for us. See, God created us, he called us, he gifted us, not so that we're freeloaders, but so that we're free to actually do what we listen to him saying. Restoration is a cooperative thing between God and us. Stay alert, listen, and then do it. Look with me at how prepared Nehemiah is on the spot. I imagine Nehemiah, when the king says this, putting down his cup, right? Pulling out some papers and charts from his vest, right? Ready to do some quick talking when the window of opportunity comes up. He says, I also said to the king, if it pleases the king, let me have letters addressed to the governors of the province west of the Euphrates River, instructing them to let me travel safely through their territories on my way to Judah, okay? And please give me a letter addressed to Asaph, the manager of the king's forest, instructing him to give me timber, I'm going to need it, to make beams for the gates of the temple fortress, for the city walls, and for a house for myself. Can you see it? I mean, Nehemiah knew he needed time off. He knew he needed letters for governors all along his 850-mile route. He knew he needed a letter for Asaph for an order of timber. For what? Well, of course, for the beams for the gates of the house, of course, for the city walls. And yep, don't forget, Nehemiah's going to need a place to live. For God's restoring work to take hold, we need God's plan. To find recovery, you need the 12 steps. To find healing from trauma and old wounds, you need a therapist. To recover from mental illness, You need God's plan worked on by a doctor or a psychiatrist. Pray, but stay alert to the plans that God is giving you. Let God be God, and then do what He says. So what's my part in a rebuilt life? Stay prayerfully alert in my waiting, my fears, and then say this with me. It's on the screen. Go. To begin rebuilding, I must stay prayerfully alert in my plans. Lastly, Nehemiah teaches us about how prayer and gratitude go together. Nehemiah is alert to the fact that the king doesn't have to do any of this. He doesn't have to do it. It's only by God's blessings that it's happening. All glory and honor goes back to the God Nehemiah is praying to. Because remember what we said in the beginning, it's on the screen. Let's say it again. God, not human ability, is the foundation of a rebuilt life. So when it comes to the rebuilding I need, wherever I need it, wherever you need it, I must stay prayerfully alert in my waiting, through my prayers, in my plans. And when it comes to the result God gives, say it with me, it's on the screen, go. To begin rebuilding, I must stay prayerfully alert in my gratitude. You know, along that line, I've asked my friend Sue to come and give a short testimony of how staying alert to God in prayer through waiting and fears and plans brought her to gratitude. So let's welcome Sue.
Hi, my name is Sue, and I'm a beloved Kagpao, a beloved child of God and person of worth. Hey! I stand before you now living a grateful life, in recovery from codependency and anger. I am growing in my relationship with God every day. I am married to the one God has chosen for me, and experiencing a life I never dreamed was possible. I was married when I was 22 and quickly had 2 kids. I had this belief that if I could have it all, the husband, the kids, the cars, the house, I would find happiness and the love I had longed for all my life. I had grown up in the 70s and 80s, and all those soft rock love songs described what I deeply wanted, to be loved completely by someone, and I would have my happily ever after. Well, that didn't happen. My first husband died when I was 37, and I quickly found a new man and believed he would bring me happiness. Instead, he was abusive, and I had to get a restraining order against him. Again, I set out to find a new man, still believing that I needed to have a man in my life to be happy. And I soon found another man. 4 months later, we were married. I swore this time it would be different. I would do the things I needed to do to make him happy, and he, in return, would make me happy. After 14 years of marriage, it ended in divorce. I had started my recovery journey towards the end of our marriage, and I continued after the divorce. What I had come to understand is that I was broken. I had attracted broken men as well. Every one of those relationships started out as a sexual relationship. We thought it was love. This was not a strong foundation for a marriage. I was done looking for a man. I didn't want to go the pain of loss ever again. As I traveled through my journey of recovery, God was calling me closer to him. I began spending more time in prayer with God. He showed me that he was the love my heart and soul longed for, and that he did have a good plan for the rest of my life. I just had to trust him. During prayer time, he revealed to me what I wanted and needed to have in a man. Together, God and I made a list, with the biggest requirement for me was that the man he had for me had to have a heart and desire for God. to live a life seeking Him in everything. When my daughter told me that Mike had asked her if he could ask me out, the first thing that went through my mind was fear. Fear of failure, fear of trusting. I wasn't sure I was ready. So I spent some time in prayer with God. He knew what I needed. He knew what I wanted. I sought wise counsel from Pastor Arlene. And when Mike did ask me to go out on a date, just to get to know each other, I said, okay. Our first date was just that. Mike came to pick me up. He had even brought me flowers. We went to dinner where God was telling me to be quiet and listen. God has a way of making sure I do what He tells me to do, because I ended up having laryngitis because I was recovering from a cold. So I had to listen. At the end of the date, he drove me home. He walked me to the door and asked me for another date, to which I agreed. Mike stated what his intentions were, and that was to court me, to see if we wanted to work toward one day getting married. And each time fear would arise in me, I would pray, or Mike and I would pray together. We had agreed from the beginning sex was off the table. Phew, I could relax. Funny thing was, I didn't know how to date without sex. After all, it's what Brooke and Sue knew and thought how relationships worked. This gave us the chance to really get to know each other and each other's heart and love for God. We did not exchange any I love yous until we both agreed the time was appropriate. And we decided we did want to work toward getting married. We attended premarital counseling with Pastor Sherry and began planning a wedding. This time we were planning a marriage, not just the wedding. And God would be at the center of all of it. Our wedding day came, and we said our we wills. We didn't say I do, but we will. We will continue to live our vows, seeking God in all we do. From our first night as husband and wife, there was a new closeness I had never imagined was possible, and the ability to be vulnerable and honest with each other without any fear. And God has remained constantly at the center of all of it. I recently realized that God used Mike to redeem my past. By asking me to wait for sex, to just wanting to get to know me, to pray with me, I felt treasured and respected. That was something I had never experienced. I am grateful for the healing I have received from God and the restoration of my value as a person. But I am also grateful for those dark times, the difficult times, the tears, the prayers, and realizing God never left me, and at just the right moment, He brought me just the man He had prepared for me. As God became the foundation of my new rebuilt life, I sought Him in prayer before I did anything. It was then, as I listened to God's response and His plan for my life, that I was able to overcome my fears, not rush into yet another relationship based on what I had mistaken time and time again for love. God is so amazing. Without Him at the center of it all, I would not be where I am and able to experience such an amazing relationship with my husband. Every day, I am more grateful for God's plan, which has been more than I could ever imagine. Thank you for letting me share.
And thank you for sharing. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sue. Thank you. Okay, yeah, just grab that over to Ann. That's great. Gosh, thank you, Sue. Thank you, Sue. You know, a rebuilt life comes with a cost. It comes with a cost. What will it cost me to rebuild my life God's way? We need to count the cost. Your rebuilt life is waiting. It's beautiful, but it's going to cost you. Staying in prayer, being alert to God at all times through your waiting, your fears, your planning, and with gratitude. This will be your sacrifice as you turn your life and your will over to the care of God, and then be alert to what He says and willing to walk through it. As the band comes up, let's stand for prayer. God, accept our sacrifice. Accept the sacrifice of our prayer and our alertness to how you respond today. We need rebuilding in so many ways. You know them. But we know it's in your timing that the rebuild happens. So we're alert. We're alert to patience. In our patience, we might be frightened, but we walk with you as our protector. And Lord, we want to listen to your plans so we can be at the ready to act when you say so. And God, we give you all the glory for the restoration you're bringing us even now. In Jesus' name, amen. The altar is open for prayer. Please come. If you'd like somebody to pray with you, please raise your hand.